The dust kicked up from Jake Morrison's worn boots as he trudged along the narrow desert trail. His horse had gone lame 3 days back, forcing him to abandon the animal at a trading post 50 miles behind him. Now he walked with nothing but a bedroll, his grandfather's old rifle, and the clothes on his back. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly, turning his shirt into a sweat-soaked rag that clung to his lean frame. Jake had been drifting for 2 years now, ever since the bank foreclosed on his family's ranch back in Kansas. His pa had died of fever, and his ma followed 6 months later from what the doctor called a broken heart. With no money for the funeral and debts piling up, Jake had packed what little he owned and headed west. He'd heard stories of gold in the mountains and work on the cattle drives, but so far, all he'd found was empty promises and hard luck. The trail wound through red rock canyons and sparse desert vegetation. Sagebrush dotted the landscape like gray-green ghosts, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the cloudless sky. Jake's water was running low again. He'd filled his canteen at a muddy stream that morning, but the liquid tasted of alkali and left a bitter coating in his mouth. His stomach cramped with hunger. The last of his hardtack was gone, and he hadn't seen game in 2 days. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Jake spotted something that made him pause. Smoke rose in thin wisps from beyond a cluster of mesquite trees. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle slung across his shoulder. In this territory, smoke could mean many things. Travelers like himself, perhaps, or maybe a ranch. But it could also mean Apache, and Jake had heard enough stories about what happened to lone white men who stumbled into the wrong camp. He crept forward, using the scattered boulders as cover. The smoke grew thicker, and he caught the scent of burning juniper mixed with something else, something that reminded him of the wild sage his ma used to gather. As he drew closer, he heard voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize, musical and flowing, completely different from any tongue he'd encountered before. Through a gap in the rocks, Jake saw them. 3 Apache women sat around a small fire, their dark hair gleaming in the afternoon light. They wore traditional dresses made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the sun like tiny jewels. The youngest of the 3 was beautiful in a way that made Jake forget to breathe. Her skin was the color of honey, and her movements as she tended the fire were graceful and sure. Jake knew he should back away, find another route around their camp. His common sense told him that approaching would be foolish, possibly deadly. But something kept him frozen in place, watching the young woman as she worked. She was weaving something from dried grasses, her fingers moving with practiced skill. Occasionally she would laugh at something one of the older women said. And the sound was like water flowing over smooth stones. The older women appeared to be teaching her something, pointing to different plants they had gathered and speaking in serious tones. The young woman nodded attentively, asking questions that sparked animated discussions. Jake wished he could understand their words, but the meaning seemed clear enough from their gestures. This was some kind of lesson, perhaps about the plants and their uses. As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself completely absorbed in watching them. He'd never seen people who seemed so completely at home in this harsh landscape. They moved with confidence, knowing exactly which plants to gather, how to build their fire so it produced minimal smoke, where to position themselves to catch the cooling breeze that whispered through the canyon. The young woman stood and walked toward a patch of flowering cacti not far from Jake's hiding place. His heart hammered against his ribs as she approached. She knelt beside a large barrel cactus that was crowned with bright red blooms. With careful, reverent movements, she began to gather the flowers, placing them in a woven basket. Her concentration was complete, and Jake found himself mesmerized by the gentle way she handled each bloom. He shifted his weight, trying to get a better view, and a small stone skittered down the slope. The young woman's head snapped up immediately, her dark eyes scanning the rocks where Jake crouched. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desert scrub. Jake's mouth went dry and his hand tightened on his rifle. But instead of calling out in alarm, the young woman simply looked at him with curiosity, as if he were an interesting bird that had landed nearby. Slowly, she returned to her flower gathering, but Jake noticed she kept glancing in his direction. The older women seemed unaware of his presence, continuing their conversation by the fire. The young woman picked the last of the cactus flowers and stood, brushing dust from her dress. She looked directly at Jake again, and this time she smiled. That smile hit him like lightning. It was warm and genuine, without fear or hostility. Jake realized he was grinning back like a fool, completely forgetting the danger of his situation. The young woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering something, then walked back toward the fire with her basket of red blooms. Jake watched as she sat with the other women and began sorting through her collection. The older women examined the flowers, nodding approvingly. One of them, who appeared to be the eldest, spoke at length while gesturing toward the blooms. The young woman listened intently, occasionally asking questions that prompted detailed explanations. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the canyon walls with shades of gold and orange, the women began to pack up their gathering. They carefully extinguished their fire, scattering the ashes and covering the spot with sand until no trace remained. Jake marveled at how they could erase all evidence of their presence so completely. The young woman stood with her basket of flowers and looked once more in Jake's direction. This time she raised her hand in what might have been a greeting or farewell. Then she did something that puzzled Jake completely. She selected one of the red cactus blooms from her basket and placed it carefully on a flat stone, positioning it so it was clearly visible from where Jake hid. The three women gathered their belongings and walked away down the canyon, their footsteps silent on the sandy ground. Soon they disappeared around a bend, leaving only the lingering scent of sage smoke and the single red flower on the stone. Jake waited until he was certain they were gone before emerging from his hiding place. He approached the stone cautiously, his eyes fixed on the bright bloom. Up close, it was even more beautiful, its petals soft and velvety, still fresh with morning dew despite the heat of the day. He picked it up gingerly, surprised by its delicate weight. The flower seemed like a gift, though Jake couldn't understand why a complete stranger would leave him such a thing. Perhaps it was Apache hospitality, a way of acknowledging his presence without confrontation. Or maybe it was simply a kind gesture from a young woman who had noticed his travel-worn appearance and taken pity on him. Jake tucked the flower carefully into his shirt pocket, making sure it wouldn't be crushed. The petals felt cool against his chest, and their faint fragrance followed him as he continued down the trail. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair. The encounter had filled him with a strange sense of hope, as if the desert itself had offered him a blessing. As darkness began to settle over the canyon, Jake made camp beside a small spring he discovered tucked between two towering rocks. The water was clear and sweet, nothing like the bitter alkaline stuff he'd been drinking. He filled his canteen and splashed his face, washing away days of accumulated dust and sweat, while he prepared his meager meal of jerky and wild onions he'd found earlier. Jake's thoughts kept returning to the young Apache woman, her grace, her smile, the gentle way she'd gathered the flowers. He wondered what her name might be, what her life was like in this harsh but beautiful land. The flower in his pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, a tangible reminder of their brief encounter. That night Jake slept better than he had in months. His dreams were filled with images of the young woman, her laughter echoing through canyon walls painted with sunrise colors. He saw her teaching him about the desert plants, showing him which ones held water, which ones could heal, which ones could nourish. In his dreams, they walked together through landscapes of red rock and endless sky, two souls finding peace in the vastness of the territory. When morning came, Jake woke to find the flower still fresh in his pocket, its red petals unfaded despite the desert heat. He smiled as he carefully transferred it to a small tin cup for protection. Whatever the gesture had meant, it felt like the first piece of good luck he'd encountered since leaving Kansas. Maybe his fortunes were finally beginning to change. The trail ahead wound deeper into Apache territory, toward mining towns and cattle ranches where a man might find work. Jake shouldered his bedroll and rifle, checked that his precious flower was secure, and set off with renewed energy. Behind him, the canyon where he'd first seen the young woman glowed pink and gold in the early light, holding its secrets close to the desert earth. What? Jake didn't know was that the flower wasn't simply a gift or gesture of kindness. In Apache tradition, certain flowers carried deep significance, especially when given by an unmarried woman to a man who had caught her attention. The red cactus bloom was one of the most meaningful. 3 weeks had passed since Jake discovered the red flower, and his luck seemed to have taken a definite turn for the better. He'd found work at the Broken Wheel Ranch, 20 miles south of the canyon where he'd encountered the Apache women. The pay wasn't much, but it included meals and a bunk in the ranch hand's quarters. After months of sleeping under the stars and scrounging for food, the simple pleasures of regular meals and a roof over his head felt like luxury. The Broken Wheel was owned by Samuel Carter, a gruff but fair man who'd come to Arizona Territory 10 years earlier with dreams of building a cattle empire. Carter had fought Apaches in his early days, losing several head of cattle to raids, but in recent years, an uneasy peace had settled over the region. The local Apache bands had moved deeper into the mountains, and encounters with settlers had become rare. Jake proved to be a capable ranch hand. His years growing up on his family's farm had taught him how to handle cattle, mend fences, and fix equipment. The other hands accepted him readily enough, though they sometimes teased him about the pressed flower he kept carefully preserved in his Bible. Jake had never told them exactly where it came from, only that it was a good luck charm. "That flower's seen better days," remarked Tom Brennan, an Irish immigrant who'd been working the ranch for 3 years. He pointed at the tin cup where Jake kept the bloom protected. "You planning to press every flower between here and California?" Jake shrugged, not wanting to explain the strange pull he felt to keep the flower safe. "My ma always said flowers brought good fortune. Figured it couldn't hurt." The truth was more complicated. Jake found himself thinking about the Apache woman constantly. Her face appeared in his dreams, and sometimes, when he was working alone on the range, he imagined he caught a glimpse of her moving through the sagebrush. The flower had become his connection to that moment of unexpected beauty in his otherwise hard life. Carter assigned Jake to ride the southern boundaries of the ranch, checking for broken fence lines and straying cattle. This took him close to the canyon country where he'd first encountered the Apache women. Each day, as he rode through the red rock landscape, Jake found himself hoping for another glimpse of the mysterious young woman on a warm Thursday morning. As Jake repaired a section of fence damaged by javelinas, he heard voices carried on the desert wind. His horse lifted its head, ears pricked forward, and Jake immediately recognized the musical quality of Apache speech. His heart began to race as he quietly gathered his tools and moved toward the sound. Through a screen of juniper trees, Jake saw them again. The same 3 women sat beside a different spring, this one hidden in a grove of cottonwoods whose leaves whispered secrets in the breeze. The young woman he remembered was there, but she looked different somehow. Her usual confidence seemed diminished, as she sat apart from the others, staring into the clear water with sad eyes. The older women were speaking to her in serious tones, their voices carrying notes of concern and what sounded like gentle scolding. The young woman responded quietly, shaking her head several times. Jake wished desperately that he could understand their words, but their body language told a story of disappointment and worry as Jake watched. The eldest woman stood and began gathering medicinal plants from around the spring. She moved with purpose, selecting specific leaves and roots with the expertise of someone who'd been healing for decades. The middle-aged woman joined her, and together they prepared what appeared to be some kind of herbal remedy. The young woman remained by the water, occasionally touching her throat and looking distressed. It occurred to Jake that she might be ill, which would explain the worried attention of her companions. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his desire to help overriding his caution about approaching Apache women alone. The sound of his footstep on dry leaves caused all 3 women to turn toward him. The older women immediately positioned themselves protectively in front of the younger one, their hands moving to the knives at their belts. But the young woman gently pushed past them, her eyes lighting up with recognition and something that might have been joy. She spoke rapidly to the older women, gesturing toward Jake with obvious excitement. Their expressions shifted from hostility to surprise to what Jake could only describe as shocked understanding. The eldest woman stared at him with new interest, her weathered face creasing into an expression of amazement. Jake raised his hands peacefully, showing he meant no harm. "I don't want to trouble you ladies," he said slowly. "I just thought you seemed worried about something." The young woman stepped closer, and Jake noticed she was breathing shallowly, as if each breath required effort. Her skin, while still beautiful, had a pale quality that hadn't been there before. She reached into a small leather pouch at her waist and withdrew something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was a red cactus flower, identical to the one she'd left for him weeks ago. But this one was fresh, its petals still dewy with morning moisture. She held it out to him with both hands. Speaking in Apache while her eyes never left his face, the older women exchanged meaningful looks, and the eldest began speaking to Jake in broken English mixed with Spanish words he recognized. "She wait for you. 3 weeks she wait. Every day she go to place where you find flower. Come back." Jake felt his world tilt slightly as understanding began to dawn. "She was waiting for me? But I don't understand. Why would she ... The middle-aged woman, who Jake now realized might be the young woman's mother, stepped forward. Her English was better than the elders. "Flower. Not gift like white man think. Flower mean, how you say, she choose you. She want to marry with you." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at the young woman, who was still holding out the fresh flower, her dark eyes filled with hope and vulnerability. All this time, he'd been carrying what amounted to a marriage proposal in his shirt pocket, completely unaware of its significance. I didn't know," Jake stammered. "Where I come from, flowers are just... I thought it was kindness. I had no idea." The young woman's face crumpled slightly at his words, and she began to lower the flower. But Jake reached out quickly, gently taking it from her hands. "No, wait, please, I'm honored, truly, I need to understand what this means." The elder woman settled herself on a flat stone and motioned for Jake to sit as well. In her halting English, mixed with gestures and occasional words from the mother, she began to explain. The young woman was called Desert Star, and she was the daughter of a respected medicine woman. At 22, she was considered past the usual age for marriage, having turned down several suitors from neighboring Apache bands. "She different," the elder explained. "She see visions sometimes. Dreams of man from far place, man with light hair and blue eyes. When she see you watching from rocks, she know you are man from dreams." Desert Star had convinced her family to let her follow the old traditions of courtship, leaving the flower as a proposal. In Apache custom, if a man found and kept such a flower, it signaled his acceptance of the woman's intentions. The couple would then meet with families to discuss the marriage arrangements. "But I took it away with me," Jake said, understanding beginning to flood through him. "She thought I'd rejected her." The mother nodded gravely. "She wait anyway. Every sunrise, every sunset?" "She believed dreams speak truth. But 3 weeks pass, and she grows sick with sadness. Heart sickness make body weak." Jake looked at Desert Star, who had been listening to this explanation with growing embarrassment. Her cheeks were flushed, and she kept her eyes downcast, clearly mortified that her feelings were being discussed so openly. But when Jake reached out and gently lifted her chin, she met his gaze with courage that took his breath away. "I kept your flower," he said softly, pulling the pressed bloom from his pocket. "I kept it because it was beautiful, like you. I didn't understand what it meant, but I treasured it anyway." Desert Star's eyes widened as she saw the carefully preserved flower. She spoke rapidly to the other women, pointing to the bloom and then to Jake. The elder woman smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "She say you have good heart," the elder translated. "You keep flowers safe even when you no understand. This show you respect sacred things. This good sign for marriage." Jake felt his world spinning again. Marriage to a woman whose language he didn't speak, whose customs he didn't understand, whose people had been at war with his people for generations. It should have terrified him. Instead, as he looked into Desert Star's hopeful eyes, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before his parents died, a sense of belonging. "I don't have much to offer," Jake said honestly. "I'm just a drifter with no family, no money, no land. I work on a cattle ranch for wages." The women spoke among themselves in Apache, their conversation growing animated. Finally, the mother turned back to Jake. "Desert Star say she no need rich man. She need man with honor, man who keep promises, man who love desert like she love. You show respect for her gift. You work with hands, not steel." This enough for Apache woman. The elder woman stood and gathered her medicine plants. "We go now to speak with Desert Star's father and grandfather. They must hear of this before sun sets. If they approve, you come." The full moon hung like a silver coin above the desert as Jake approached the Apache village, his heart hammering against his ribs. 2 weeks of preparation had led to this moment, and he prayed he'd done everything correctly. Behind him, a pack mule carried the gifts he'd carefully chosen: wool blankets from the trading post, tobacco, coffee, sugar, and several bottles of medicine he'd purchased from the town doctor. The most significant gift was the horse he led beside his own mount. Jake had spent every penny of his savings and borrowed against his future wages to buy the beautiful bay mare from Carter. The rancher had been surprisingly understanding when Jake explained his situation, even helping him select a horse that would impress the Apache men. "You're either the bravest fool I ever met or the luckiest," Carter had said as Jake prepared to leave. "Apache marriages don't often work out for white men, but if anyone can make it happen, I reckon it's you. You've got an honest heart, and that counts for something." Now, as Jake saw the flickering campfires of the village ahead, he wondered if honest hearts were enough to bridge the vast cultural divide he was about to cross. The Apache camp was larger than he'd expected, perhaps 50 or 60 people gathered in family groups around scattered fires. Dogs barked at his approach, and he could see figures emerging from wickiups to get a look at the white man who'd come calling. Desert Star appeared at the edge of the firelight, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She wore a traditional dress of white deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork and silver, ornaments that caught the moonlight like captured stars. Her long black hair was braided with ribbons and small shells, and her face glowed with joy and nervous excitement. Behind her came an imposing figure that could only be her father. He was tall and powerfully built, with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Jake's appearance and possessions. His expression was neutral, giving nothing away about his feelings toward this unprecedented situation. "You came," Desert Star said in carefully pronounced English. And Jake realized with surprise that she'd been learning his language during the past 2 weeks. "I promised I would," Jake replied, dismounting slowly to show respect. He'd practiced the few Apache words the trading post owner had taught him, but his tongue felt thick and clumsy around the unfamiliar sounds. I bring gifts for your family." An elderly man approached from one of the larger wickiups, leaning heavily on a walking stick but moving with unmistakable dignity. This was clearly the grandfather Desert Star's mother had mentioned, probably a chief or senior medicine man. His weathered face bore the lines of many years and countless hard decisions. The formal negotiations began immediately. Through Desert Star, who served as translator, the men discussed Jake's background, his intentions, and his ability to provide for a wife. Jake answered honestly about his lack of family, his work at the ranch, and his willingness to learn Apache ways. The questioning was thorough but not hostile, and gradually Jake began to sense a cautious approval from the assembled men. The gifts were examined and deemed acceptable. The horse especially drew admiring comments, and Jake saw Desert Star's father run his hands over the mare's legs and shoulders with the expertise of a lifetime horseman. When the man nodded with satisfaction, Jake knew he'd chosen well. As the formal discussions continued, Jake became aware of the women watching from nearby fires. They spoke among themselves in low voices, occasionally pointing at him or making gestures toward Desert Star. Some seemed curious, others skeptical, but none appeared openly hostile. Children peeked at him from behind their mothers' skirts. Clearly fascinated by his light hair and blue eyes, The grandfather finally stood and spoke at length in Apache, his voice carrying the authority of age and wisdom. Desert Star translated, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. He says you seem like a man of honor, but honor must be tested. Apache men prove themselves through trials that show courage, wisdom, and respect for our ways. If you truly want to marry an Apache woman, you must become Apache in your heart. Jake had expected something like this. What kind of trials? The grandfather's eyes glinted with what might have been approval at Jake's direct question. Through Desert Star, he explained that Jake would need to spend one full moon cycle living with the tribe, learning their customs, their language, and their relationship with the desert. He would hunt with the men, learn the sacred stories from the elders, and demonstrate that he could survive and thrive in the Apache way of life. And if I fail these tests, then you go back to your people, and Desert Star chooses another path, came the translated reply. Jake looked at Desert Star, seeing both hope and fear in her dark eyes. The magnitude of what he was attempting suddenly hit him fully. He wasn't just marrying a woman. He was joining an entire people, adopting a completely different way of understanding the world. If he failed, he would lose not just Desert Star, but this chance to find true belonging. I accept, he said, meeting the grandfather's steady gaze. I want to learn your ways. The old man smiled for the first time that evening, revealing teeth worn down by years of desert living but eyes bright with intelligence and humor. He spoke again, and Desert Star's translation made Jake's heart leap. He says you answer like Apache warrior? Bold, but not foolish. We begin teaching tomorrow when sun rises. The formal ceremony concluded with the sharing of food. Jake was invited to sit at the grandfather's fire, a significant honor that wasn't lost on the watching tribe members. The meal consisted of venison, corn mush, wild onions, and a type of bread made from ground seeds that was surprisingly delicious. As they ate, various men approached to introduce themselves and ask questions about life among the white settlers. Jake found himself relaxing as the evening progressed. These were people who valued the same things he'd been raised to respect: hard work, loyalty to family, and courage in the face of hardship. Their methods and customs might be different, but the underlying principles felt familiar after the meal. Desert Star was permitted to sit beside Jake and practice her English. She'd learned far more than he'd expected, enough for simple conversations about daily life and feelings. Her dedication to bridging their language barrier moved him deeply. I study every day, she explained carefully. Old Maria, she knows white words from trading post. She teach me. I want to speak with you in your tongue and mine. You're doing wonderfully, Jake assured her. I want to learn Apache too. Will you teach me? Desert Star's smile lit up the firelight. Yes, we teach each other. Make understanding between us. They spent the next hour exchanging words and phrases, laughing at each other's pronunciation mistakes. Jake learned that Desert Star's name in Apache was more complex than its English translation, carrying meanings related to the star patterns that appeared during her birth month. She taught him the words for basic things: water, horse, fire, food, family da as the evening wound down. The grandfather approached with news that would shape Jake's trial period. He would live with Desert Star's family, sleeping in a separate wickiup but participating in all daily activities. He would learn to hunt with Apache weapons, gather traditional foods, and understand the spiritual practices that govern tribal life. Most important, Desert Star translated her grandfather's words. You must learn that Apache people are not separate from desert. We are part of same spirit, same life. If you cannot feel this connection, you cannot be truly Apache. Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what the old man meant. He'd grown up seeing the land as something to be worked, used, conquered when necessary. The idea of being spiritually connected to the landscape was foreign to his understanding. Over the following days, Jake threw himself into Apache life with determination born of love. He learned to use a bow and arrow, though his accuracy was laughably poor compared to Apache boys half his age. He practiced stalking techniques, moving silently through brush and over rocky ground. The men taught him to read animal signs, to find water in seemingly barren landscapes, and to navigate by stars and landmarks. The learning went beyond practical skills. Jake participated in sweat lodge ceremonies that purified both body and spirit. He listened to ancient stories told around evening fires, tales that explained the relationship between the Apache people and the animals, plants, and geological features of their homeland. Gradually, he began to understand what the grandfather had meant about connection to the land during quiet moments. Jake and Desert Star continued their language lessons and got to know each other as people rather than romantic ideals. He learned that she was fiercely intelligent, with interests in healing plants and astronomy. She had been studying the movements of stars and planets since childhood. Understanding patterns that help predict weather and seasonal changes, Desert Star told him about her visions. The dreams that had showed her a blue-eyed man from the east long before Jake appeared in the canyon. She'd never spoken of these dreams to previous suitors, knowing they would think her strange. But with Jake, she felt safe sharing the deepest parts of herself. "I see you in dreams for 2 years," she confided one evening as they walked beside a stream. "Sometimes I think I go crazy, dream about man who not exist. Then you come and everything makes sense."